Good afternoon, everyone. We're just coming together and welcoming everyone at the moment, just getting everyone settled in. Again, my name is Jenny Whitener. I'm with Bridge Innovate, and we're thrilled to welcome you to today's program. We're in for a real treat. I'm so thrilled to have all of you here. Today's program, Working in the 21st Century, Thinking of Organizations as Organisms. It is our distinct pleasure to have with us today Dr. Greg Morris. Greg and I were just reminiscing a bit as we're getting ready for you guys to join us today about our backgrounds and how we connected. We had the privilege of teaming up at Ernst & Young, where we share a background in Ernst & Young Management Consulting, and Greg and I were both part of the healthcare consulting practice and continue to stay involved in working together on transformation and change initiatives all around the world. Greg went on after E&Y to launch his own business, and we're thrilled that he is with us today as managing partner of Morris Hummel, LLC. So many of you know us as Bridge Innovate. We are a collection of business strategists, consultants, and leaders that work alongside you to create defining moments to some of your greatest challenges. We've had the pleasure to team up with organizations all across the globe, from nonprofits to local regional companies to big global giants like Cargill. So we are glad to have you with us today. So thank you for using the chat to say hello. And then as we keep going, we'll formally introduce Dr. Greg Morris. So Greg, you and I talked a little bit at the beginning of today's program about your background. Share with us some of the highlights. You have an amazing career. You talked about the fact that you've done consulting with payers and hospitals and providers. You've been a practicing physician. You've done extreme work in executive leadership development with global giant companies. You're on board of directors. Tell us some highlights. What would you like for the audience to know about you?
Well, thank you, Jenny, and thanks for the opportunity to be here with you today. And it's really great, in particular, to connect with you again, given our history of having worked together and collaborated together so much in the past. And so thanks for this opportunity. And hello to those of you who've joined us today. A little bit about my background, though, is that I really set out early years to really explore and learn about the healthcare system. So as that, I practiced internal medicine as a physician. I've worked on the payer equation side of the equation, which was with Cigna. I've worked with MetLife, Blue Cross and Blue Shield in executive roles. And I've also worked on the hospital side. I was the head of strategy, business development, and also marketing, communications, and public relations for Advocate Healthcare, hospital system based in Chicago. So it really gave me an opportunity to see the healthcare system from all directions. Upon seeing that, I concluded that there's two reasons why I say we will not fix it. And one is that virtually no one understands the whole system. Everyone just understands a part of it. And the other is that we tend to operate from a point of view of self-interest. I'm only worried about how my part works. No one is concerned about the way the whole system functions. And so I began asking the question, how do you get people to work and align around the common good? And it's that led me into what is either my third or fourth career, depending on how we count it. But I've worked in the organizational change, the space of organizational change for the last 15, 16 years now. And it's really been a lot of fun. It's been very interesting. And I've ventured out of healthcare, by the way, to work across industries for this work over the last 15 years.
Great, then let's keep going. Share with us today your perspectives.
Well, okay, so first of all, I'd like to say I'm really excited about one particular thing. I expect to publish my first book in April of 2021. My working title is The Nature of Work in the 21st Century, and I have a subtitle, Thinking of Organizations as Organisms. In it, I'll present a set of novel ideas about a system of management to replace the industrial control paradigm for work under which we've operated for the last 150 years. In my work, I enable client organizations to achieve their goals. One of the really fun things that I've done over the last number of years is my firm was the engine for UL, or Underwriters Laboratories, Global Leader Program for almost 14 years. My business partner and I served as the curriculum designers and faculty for that experiential learning program. The first 2 years, the pilot years, we actually served as faculty members for Northwestern University for that program. Now, my clients are executives, most with global responsibilities, and who are on the hook for both the transformation and growth results. Now, just a quick question. How many of you have global clients, colleagues, or vendors? You might just comment in your chat just to get a little feel for the work that you do. Okay. So far, a handful of answers are yes. So thanks for sharing. Working with global teams has been really rewarding for me. Now, thus far, I've used the word work probably 10, 11 times here. And I wanted to highlight the fact that we use the word work very loosely and in very ill-defined ways. And it's my hope that in this conversation that I can add a little practical definition to this concept called work. Mary? So many of you probably are familiar with how change efforts tend to cause a bubble of work, a rise in the number of tasks that we have to do in order to reach the next stage. So given both the frenetic pace of change that we're experiencing before the pandemic and the massive amount of change thrust upon us by the pandemic, we should brace for a really big bubble of extra work ahead of us to reach the new normal. I want to share one idea with you that I believe will enhance your ability to do two things. One, to more accurately and consistently diagnose the problems that you must solve, and two, to design more effective solutions. And if you just click once there, Mary, for the sake of this conversation, let's assume that organizations are systems. Ecosystems, school systems, computer, transportation systems, all are examples of systems that are made up of regularly interacting and interdependent parts forming a whole. Similarly, organizations are systems with regularly interacting and interdependent individuals, teams, and units forming a unified whole. So what are these? Any comments on what these might be here? Okay. Well, they're engines, they're motors, right? So they're also examples of systems that fit into other systems or larger systems. Next. So each system is designed for a specific outcome. So whether we want to fly from city to city, we're looking for a bird's eye view of the community, or a street level view of the city, the fact is that the outcomes can't be substantially altered without substantial change in the system. We can't get that drone engine to fuel the airliner that flies over the ocean. So we've got to change the system is the key in order to change the outcome. So similarly, your organization is designed to produce the results that you currently get. So if you want different results, you have to actually change your system. Changing the goals isn't sufficient. You actually have to change your system. All right, next slide. So we use frameworks to facilitate our shared understanding of complex systems that are all around us and to understand how those systems work. So in one framework, galaxies with black holes in the center, suns, or stars rather, and our sun is one example of a star, planets, and a few other objects, but basically we can describe the entire known universe using those basic elements and frameworks. Even my grandsons can describe this for us. Next is the periodic table of elements, list every known element, and it's arranged in a way that enables prediction of how elements might interact with one another. And then a third framework that I'll share is, of course, my favorite, the systems of the human body, that we actually began to learn as early as kindergarten and first grade. But acknowledging a higher order system before leaving this slide, note that we are made up of elements, which in fact are all made up and produced in stars. So there's a higher order system there as we go to the next slide. So recently I asked one of my 6-year-old grandsons what they did at school that day. And the only answer I could coax from him is that, well, we did work. Well, no matter how I asked the question, work was the only answer that he would give up. We treat work the same way. I worked really hard today. Did you complete work? My work is very interesting. Here is my central point. We don't have a language or a shared frameworks that, for what happens between setting goals and accounting for results. There's no structure or language around execution that sits in between those two things. And we'll try to make that be more concrete in just a moment. But the absence of a framework around execution is a setup for suboptimal execution. So let's do an exercise to demonstrate my point. And this brings us to the paper tear exercise. So I hope all of you have just a sheet of paper nearby that you can use for this exercise. I'm going to give you a series of instructions, and I'd like for you just to simply follow those instructions, and then we'll talk about the results in just a moment. So if you're ready with a piece of paper, here we go. First instruction is to simply fold your page in half. And now tear off the upper right corner of that page. Next, fold your paper in half again and tear off the upper left corner. Fold now for a third time and tear off the lower left corner of the page. And then the final instruction is tear off the bottom right corner. Now with that, if you'd unfold your page, and if you don't mind, turn your cameras off for just a moment and display your results, and let's see what it looks like. There we go. Okay, and here's mine, if we can turn the camera back again. Now, I don't know if you've seen enough to notice, but every page essentially is going to be different. Now, we all follow precisely the same instructions, yet we get a different result. Now, I would suggest that that's true in the nature of the work that we do every day. We go through and we all say, we got it, we understand it, we all go off, and then we are not aligned in the results that we produce. But this is just a really simple exercise that's intended to, one second, the screen just went haywire. That simple exercise that demonstrates the dynamic is pervasive. We all think that we know what we're doing, we think that we're aligned, but it turns out that we all go off and execute differently. This gap that exists between agreement on goals and accounting for results is a big problem, but it's also a big opportunity that if we can actually recognize this gap, it positions us to add some structure, not to organization, but to the way we think, and to have us to adopt a shared mental model. Let's take a look at how one very well-known organization addresses this gap. McKenzies 7S model, many of you may know, some of you may have used, but it is a checklist of the system components. When someone goes into McKenzie, one of the first things that they do is to learn the 7S model and what it means, but it really paints a picture that helps them to recognize all the various components of the organization that may or may not participate in the given problem that they are evaluating. So what I'd like to do is now to share another way of thinking about the work required to operate an organization or to achieve goals. The next slide, please. I'd like to introduce you to what's called the enterprise process map. And so I'm just going to zoom in so that I can give you an overview of it. So the enterprise process map outlines the tasks required to achieve goals, broken down into, at the 3 levels of the map, 6 elements, 20 elements, or 75 mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive tasks. So this accounts for essentially 100% of the tasks that are necessary to operate an organization or to achieve a goal. For those of you who may be technologists out there, it is in fact consistent with an object-oriented framework. So let's look at the 6 major elements, and we'll begin with lead on the next slide. This group of tasks is about setting direction and strategy and establishing metrics that keep us focused on achieving goals. Next, on the align slide, these tasks focus on understanding the market needs. How do we add value, and how do we present that product or service to the market for potential consumption? And then the next is these tasks are about how we deliver the product or service, help the client extract the intended value. So the third slide there, the next slide there, value creation cycle. We set out to serve a market, we add value, we help customers extract the intended value, we reassess how we've done, realign, and then we go back to the market, we serve our customers, and that is a continuous cycle. That is how I would argue that we go about in organizations creating value. Now, that covers the first 3 elements in the framework. Let's move to the next 3 elements and think about them as resources or inputs that power the value creation cycle. So, and the next one, serve. These tasks are about how we deliver the product or service and help clients to extract the intended value. Next is the intangible elements of the map. We do this to, do we have the right culture? Do we have people who possess the right skills? Are we sufficiently innovative as an organization? These are all the kinds of questions that we might ask as we consider this element of the map. Next, as we think about the ecosystem connectivity, are we connected to the right strategic partners? Do we have the effective arrangements that we need, and agreements and business models in place? Do we have the right steps in place to assure the privacy and security of information as we move information across the ecosystem? I think I skipped one, but I'll just comment about it. The tangible assets, do we have the right number of buildings, offices? Do we have the right number of computers? How much capital do we need? And so those are those elements that allow us to understand the tangible assets and how we move them. So if you could advance now, please, one right there. So once again, that accounts for 100% of the tasks that we need to operate an organization or to achieve a set of goals. This framework simply provides us a checklist of the elements which potentially are contributors to a problem at hand. And so let me give you an example of how we might use this to address a set of problems. And so we can go to the next slide. So let's consider an organization, maybe an organization that's not meeting its sales goals. This isn't, typically what we do is we run off and we get sales training when we're not meeting our sales goals. But let's think about this for 1 second. As we consider the lead elements, targets may not be realistic. We may not have completed a thorough assessment of the market. We may simply not be tracking the right metrics to keep us on track. As we think about the elements in a line, it might be, rather than focus on the customer needs, we're focusing on and trying to sell our bells and whistles, might be one of the things that we've done, or we haven't taken the time to adequately understand the needs that our market has. Under the serve element, we might drop our product off at the customer's doorstep, but we do a poor job of helping them to extract the desired value. And by the time they've done that once or twice, then the word is out that we're just not the right organization to buy from. Thinking tangible, well, are we using tangible assets in an optimal fashion? Not too much, not too little. Do we have sufficient production capacity? Intangible, are we leveraging our intangible assets optimally? Is our culture focused on service or efficiency? Have we prepared our people to think critically? So these are some of the kinds of elements that we think. And finally, as we look at the ecosystem connectivity, Have we optimized our connectivity to relevant ecosystems in which we are a part? Are we able to connect to top strategic partners to assure on-time production and product delivery? So once again, this provides us a checklist that allows us to look at a given problem and to now go through, just like pilots do before flying the plane, let's just check and see which of these elements might be things that we need to pay more attention to, and not simply go with the top line thought, we're not producing enough sales, we have to change our sales incentives and we have to train our salespeople. We have to think about all the other elements of our system that may be contributing to the fact that we're not getting the sales that we need and that we want. So the last slide, and to summarize, there are benefits to you adopting the belief that organizations are systems, because it opens up a door for you to do some things in ways that are different than you've done them before. To recognize that changing the system is required to change the output or the results that your organization is achieving. So with that realization, we know that we have to think about changing the system, not just change the goals, but change the way the system operates. We need a framework around which to build a shared understanding for your system and how it works. If you're going to get people aligned and changing the system, we all have to have a mental map that we can follow that keeps us aligned as we go about working in both the current state and the future state. If your objective is to achieve goals, then why not orient your efforts around understanding the work that is required to achieve the goals? We can align ourselves around a lot of thoughts, but it seems to me that we're missing the opportunity. If to achieve the goals requires certain work, then let's think about what that work is. And that gives us a much better chance of actually achieving those goals. So this approach helps us fill a gap between stating goals and accounting for results. It gives us a tool to focus on to allow us to understand how we're going to go about being better at what we do. I hope this brief discussion prompts you to begin thinking differently about how you will go about creating success in your own organization.
Great.
So, with that, Jenny.
Yes. Thank you, Greg. That was wonderful. Appreciate it so much. You know, I want to invite our participants today to, if you have questions, to post them in the chat. And certainly with the size of the group that we have today, if you want to even come off of mute and ask your question directly to Dr. Morris, that'd be great. I want to maybe just start us off, Greg, as people are thinking about the questions that you might have prompted with them today. You talked about the importance of thinking of organizations as systems, and then you talked about this aspect of goal setting. One of the things that I've seen get in the way of interrelationships of work is the reward system. So if you think of an executive having a certain set of goals, and then especially if they have an incentive comp structure with certain rewards that are more tied to their individual performance, sometimes that detracts them from being a part of a system. Can you talk about your perspective about how the reward systems for executives may or may not support the systemic approach?
So we tend to think of the rewards that we believe are ones that we like, that we want, that will help us to achieve our goals. That doesn't necessarily align with the way our system works and the way our organization actually produces value. And that's the disconnect that we have. We think of values actually work in the same way. We identify a series of values that we like and that we want to aspire to, but those particular values may not be the ones that actually cause us to work together collaboratively to achieve our goal. And so I believe that what we have to do is to take a time and step back and understand actually, how do we create value? How does it actually work in our organization? And once we understand that flow of work in that way, and we understand the connections between the way things work in various parts of our system, we can then go back and talk about what the values are that will help us to achieve this goal, and what are the incentives that we want to put into place that will prompt us doing things in the way that is consistent with how our system actually produces value.
Okay, so kind of going back to the value creation perspective first, getting alignment there, and then sort of building from there.
Every organization exists to produce value. That is the reason that we exist. And so why don't we start there in understanding what is the value that we intend to produce, and how do we organize to produce value?
That's a very good point. Good point. So Danny from UTC brings up a good point. He heads up leadership development there, and I invited him to come off of mute, but I know he's going to be running to a quick meeting in a moment. But Danny, do you want to make a comment real quick if you're still with us?
Yeah, no, I think my only quick comment is, as you were speaking, Dr. Morris, and I was just feverishly taking notes, it speaks to very similar to the content in Reinventing Organizations, the book, and I know I learned a lot from you in that book, but it just, I think it's a time that we need to think differently about organizations moving forward. For a lot of different reasons, for the benefit of the constituents that we work with, to keep people growing in professional development, and to keep them moving forward. But I think there's things that we need to do differently. So I appreciated the content, a lot to think about. Now the hard part is influencing those that need to hear this message, and making sure that they're hearing it as well. So I appreciate the content.
Well, thanks for your thought and your comment. The fact is that we've been working on this industrial control system for 150 years now. It was a system that was put into place to control people so that people didn't make the application of technology be inefficient. So how do we scale the technology efficiently? So let's put a process in place to keep the people under control. Well, that's the system that we work under today, but most of us aren't involved in production now. Most of us are cognitive workers or knowledge workers or in management. And it's a very different style of working to working in production. And so I think that as we go back to recover from the pandemic, and there are reasons and indicators that the system wasn't working for us. But as we come back from the pandemic and we have this huge bubble of work to do, this huge change initiative in place, we have to do something that allows us to be more productive than we were before. And so I believe that we've got to begin to think about a system that's rather focused on creating more efficiency. We've got to find one that's focused on effectiveness, and how do we get knowledge workers and other cognitive workers to be better at solving problems and better at producing value. And I think that orientation and that change in the way we think is important, but now I think more important than ever.
Good point. Good point. Excellent point. Are there other questions? Thank you, Danny. Are there other questions or comments from our audience today that they would like to present to Dr. Morris? I know that I see some friends that are joined. Deborah Dubois, I didn't know. I know that you're with us today. Any comments that you'd like to make before we wrap up?
Well, I think this is just so relevant, and everything I'm involved in right now is about changing the system, breaking the normal rules, looking at different ways to organize. I'm in parts of organizations where we're actually experimenting with teal organizations. It's very hard to do, and that's what he's talking about, the LaRue organization, where we're reinventing organizations and doing more gig-like economies within organizations so people can go across and use their skills in different ways. And we're in a learning mode. It's all very experimental right now because it's hard to change small parts of the organization. And I'm working with some huge organizations when the rest hasn't changed. So that causes its own tensions. And like you said, it's hard to change one part of the system and then the other parts are impacted. So dealing with all that, but you can't change an organization with 10 or 20,000 or 100,000 all at once. So those are the challenges about doing this work, I think. But it's very interesting and fascinating and challenging work.
Well, thanks again for the comment. Once again, that's why I believe that frameworks are so important here. We need to be able to have us to be aligned in how we're going to approach things. And until we have a framework that actually allows us to understand the nature of the work that is required to achieve our goals, it's a little difficult to get people aligned around them. The more tightly we can have that small group of change leaders be and have them be more effective, then others will learn and we'll influence yet others. And ultimately, we can in fact spread change, but it takes a step at a time, and we need to be organized and systematic about how we go about doing so, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. That's very
Good.
true.
Thank you, Deborah. And thanks to everyone for joining today. I know that we are at time. I want to just remind you that we do have a lot of other great webinars coming up. If you want to reach out to Dr. Morris directly, he's at greg.morris@morrishummel.com. I know that he would appreciate hearing from you, and we're all looking forward to the book that's coming out. Just in terms of Bridge Innovate, we have a couple of other big webinars coming up for the remainder of our Inspire series this year. One's with Jonathan Tafts on unpacking the future, making sense of your own crystal ball. And then finally from Kristen Leidig-Bryant, also another colleague of ours from Ernst & Young, Better Virtual Meetings. And she knows, she's run a million of them. She'll be coming up on October 22nd. So we hope to see you again very soon on another bridgeinnovate.com Inspire series. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Morris. Bye now.
Thank you, Jenny.